So this little device here is a Gotek. What basically this device does, it's a very inexpensive device for what it does. It's 25 bucks. What it does basically is it emulates a floppy, or it emulates a disk drive. So I needed to find a way to get some files onto the IBM that I just purchased, that I'm restoring, and this is one of the ways to do that. There's different ways to do it. Some might be simpler than others, but I needed a justification to play with this because I've always wanted to play with one of these. These are very big in the Amiga world, very big in the music world for things that used drives in the past. So, you know, there's a lot of popularity with the Goteks. So we're going to configure this for the IBM. Keep that in mind. If you have a different computer, the basics are still all the same. I'm updating the firmware and all the stuff that we're going to do right now. But the jumper settings on it might be different. So you might want to Google Gotek GitHub and head there and look for the jumper settings for your computer. But the firmware flashing that we're going to do is all going to be the same regardless. So why are we talking about flashing the firmware? Because this unit is inexpensive. The firmware that it comes with, though, is not the best. So folks have two primary packages out there for upgrading this firmware. One is called HxCFloppy, and the other one is HxC. So I'm going to be using HxCFloppy. HxCFloppy is free. HxC costs a little bit of money. It's not that expensive, and it's still a good product regardless. But I'm going to use HxCFloppy since it's free. I'm going to take the minimal expense route here for everything that we're doing, and go from there. So in order to update the firmware on this, we're going to need what's called USB to RS-232 TTL converter, and that's what this is. And wow, all that language. What does this thing do? Okay, so this thing connects to your USB port on your computer, and the other side has 4 wires. 2 are for is for power, is 5 volts, plus and ground, and then the other 2 wires are for transmit and receive. So what we're doing with this is we're connecting this to the USB port on the computer and having it talk back and forth with the computer in order to upgrade the firmware or flash the firmware on it. So that being explained, let's see what we have to do in order to do that. So when you buy one of these Goteks, you want to first make sure that you're buying the right one, because there's different flavors. You want the one that has an IDE pinouts on the back. It has a bank of jumpers here. A lot of them don't come with a bank of jumpers here, but in fact mine didn't, but I soldered this in, because if you didn't, you're going to need to attach these wires to some of these pads here, and the easiest way to do that, short of using paper clips like some people do, is solder in a set of jumpers like I did. So first and foremost, there's that. Now there's 2 banks of jumpers here. The one we're interested in right now is this one. So on this one, there are 5 pins at the top, 4 pins on the bottom. On the far right, we're going to short these 2 pins with this jumper. That puts this in flash mode. Okay, so that tells the board that we're going to be flashing its firmware. You're going to make sure to take this pin off and not jumper them, and just put it, you know, aside once you're done with this whole thing. Okay, but for now we're going to be flashing this, so we're shorting those. Then we're going to be connecting these 4 wires here. The far left here is 5 volts. The middle 2 are ground. I usually skip one of the pins and put the negative on that pin. Make sure the colors in the description of the cable that you've bought match up with +5, minus, and because they might be different than mine, right? In my case, white is transmit And that's going to go right next to this jumper. And then in my case, green is receive, and that's going to go next to the white. So what you'll have in the end here is these top four pins. The last two are shorted, then there's transmit, then there's receive. And then there's two open pins here on top of each other. If you need to reset the board for whatever reason, you can jumper those two pins, short those two pins out for about a second, and it'll reset the board. So that's the configuration. Okay. What does this bank of pins do? Okay, again, if you go to GitHub Gotek, you'll have the configuration for your computer. For my computer, for the IBM that I'm using this for, the third pins from the right are shorted, top to bottom. That is the drive letter. In my case, it's going to be S0, which is the first drive. I might end up having to switch it. I'm not sure yet, but worst case scenario, if it doesn't look at it and identify it, recognize it, when I first boot it up, I might change that pin, because I'm doing something a little bit different on the IBM. I'm using the rear port, the external port, for my drive connection instead of the ribbon cable inside the machine. And then this other jumper here is the jumper that the GitHub documentation indicated I need a jumper for the IBM PC XT. So that's the reason for those two jumpers there. Okay, so we're good to go at this point. I'm not going to bother putting that back on for the time being. So we're going to take this and we're going to plug this into our computer, but not until we update the drivers for it. So this I got on eBay for a couple of bucks, but it may not work that, by plugging it in and having Windows recognize it right off the bat. In fact, when I put it in, it told me that its life cycle ended in 2012. So I had to go and find drivers for it, and I did find a driver for it. The driver is from 2008. It's in my description. So first thing is first, you want to use the driver in my description and load that in your PC before this gets loaded in, or before this gets plugged in. That way, when you do plug it in, it'll get recognized. So I'll show you what I'm talking about right now. We'll set up the driver, and then we'll plug this in, and I'll show you the steps to flash this, and we'll go from there. Okay, so what we want to do is install the drivers for our USB TTL converter. So you haven't plugged the converter in yet, okay? First thing we want to do is open up this window for Device Manager, and the way you do that is on the bottom left is the window icon. You right click on that, choose Device Manager, and it'll come up with this. I maximized it. I don't want two instances of it, so I'm closing this one, but that's what this is. Now we want to install the driver for this. So I've given you the files in the description. So you want to run this executable here, PL2303 drivers, generic Windows. And there you go, that'll install the drivers. At this point, typically, you'll want to reboot your computer. And then go back into Device Manager, but let's see what happens here without rebooting it. So I'm going to plug in the USB device at this point. You'll see the Device Manager screen kind of popped up a little bit. This prolific USB to serial COM port is what popped up, just in case. If it doesn't, and it says that that device is old, outdated from 2012, if it does say that, you'll want to right click on it. You want to go to Update Driver. You want to browse your computer for driver software, You want to let me pick from a list of my own devices, and you'll look for the prolific USB to serial COM port. Now, if I've had instances where the drivers came up, there was 2 drivers, one from 2008 and one was a little bit later. Choose the one from 2008 if that shows up. Okay, in this case, this is what's shown up, so you know that's the current driver for it, based on the install I just did. Okay. The bottom line is that this shows that it's been assigned a COM port 922. We do have to do one more little thing here. Is if you right click on it and you go to properties, you go to port settings, and you need to make sure that your baud rate is 57600. That's important. Yours might be 9600 when you first bring it up. I think the reason mine is 57600 is because I've already installed this once before. But make sure that that baud rate is set to that and click OK. Okay? So, at this point, I use a program called STM32 Flash to update the firmware here. So that's what we're going to do here. Is you go to the command prompt. Well, first of all, you have to install that program. So I've given you STM2 Flash. There's no Windows installation for it. You just unzip the file because you're going to run that file. So wherever you put that file, that's, you know, where you're going to run it from. So STM32 Flash Win64. There's that file right there. That's the file that you're going to execute. So let's just copy this to a temp folder here. Okay. So what we're going to do then, once you unzip that file and put it in a folder, just remember where you've put it. You're going to go to that folder. So we're going to open up the command prompt. Going to go to the temp folder. You're going to see that it's in there. So you're going to run STM32 Flash. Okay. And then after that, you're going to open up the COM port, that 922. So STM32 Flash, capital letters, COM922. Okay? That's important. If it gives you that fail to init device, don't worry about it. Don't be scared. Just go ahead and do it one more time. There we go. So it took me a couple of tries to do it. So once you have that, this shows you that you're ready to rock and roll. So at this point, there's a couple of other things that you need to do. You have to disable the write mode and you have to disable the read mode. Okay. So to disable the write mode, basically you're going to put a -U in front of the 922. Okay, this will disable write mode. That's important. And then you have to disable read mode. So to disable read mode, you're going to put a -K in front of the 922. And by the way, the way I'm going up restating that same command, the last command is I just use the up arrow. Okay. So if it gives you that, again, don't panic. Let's do it again. Okay. It just has a little issue in communicating. So there you go. So at this point, okay, you now are ready to update the firmware. So that firmware file, let's put it into the temp directory where we launched this from. That temp so there's a file, a zip file that I gave you called /floppy. If you unzip it, there's a hex file in there. This is the hex file that you want to copy to the temp directory that we just put that STM flash program in. Okay, see how this is in there? So what you're going to do now at this point to update the firmware is you're going to put a -W, okay, and then the name of the file after that. So in this case, it's ff_Gotek -v3-23.hex, and then you got your space, and then you have your COM922. So that always needs to be there because that's basically telling it where to send this file to. Now I already flashed my my unit. I don't want to flash it again, but that's you know, this is the command that you run next. And again, if you get that fail to init, just hit your up arrow and hit the command again. So, you know, after 1 or 2 tries, it should, you know, connect to it, and then it'll start showing you that it's writing to it. And when it's finished, I'll show you that screen right now. When it's finished, it'll show you that it's 100% done. So at that point, then you basically are finished. Okay? So now you can unplug the device from the USB port. You can see that it goes away from Device Manager. And then the cleanup part now is basically just taking the jumpers, just taking the plugs off, okay, from your cable, because you've already flashed it. This jumper that you had for flash enabling it, you're going to take that jumper off, and I usually just keep it there by just putting it on that one pin by itself. That way it doesn't get lost. And that's basically it. You've just flashed your Gotek device, and now you're ready to either test it first or put some of the mods next. And that's what we're going to do next. Hit the mods. Okay, so I want to show you what I've done with the Gotek off camera. I would have done it on camera, but it just makes a mess, and there's plenty of YouTube videos showing you how to make these mods. I'm just basically going to show you how they're all hooked up. And before I do so, I want to also explain, I use this TTL converter to flash the Gotek with the HxCFloppy firmware, but you don't have to use this cable. I'll explain why I used it. But you can also purchase a USB to USB cable for a few bucks. And I'm going to leave you a link to a wonderfully made YouTube video showing how you can update the firmware with a USB to USB cable. It's a lot easier than the way I did it. But the reason I use the TTL converter is, for one, I'm using it for the power to the Gotek. And I can plug this in. I can plug this into a wall wart, a 5-volt wall wart. I can plug it into the USB port on. I can plug it into a USB port on the computer. I can plug it into an external battery. So it just gives me a lot of flexibility for providing power to the Gotek. And since I already have the cable handy, that's why I chose to go that route in updating the firmware. So that being said, let's take a look at some of the things that I did. It's your standard, the three primary updates or upgrades that are done to a Gotek. For one, I replaced the screen, okay, on the front with, I replaced the three digit LED with this OLED screen. And so the way that hooks up, you can see how I did it here. Let me focus in on this a little bit. So if you follow the 4 pins from the LED, the top goes to the top right. The next one, the white one, goes underneath that one. The next one that I have here, the next red one, goes to the bottom. And that white one on the very bottom goes to the top here. Okay? So that's how the OLED is wired. And then I also put in this rotary switch. Instead of using these 2 buttons in front, you can just turn the rotary switch and push, okay, to enter. So how is the rotary switch hooked up? So you can see the bottom here. I got this rotary switch on a circuit board and I unsoldered it from the circuit board, okay. So there's 3 pins on one side, okay, that's this side. The middle pin is ground, so the middle pin goes to the very bottom. There's 2 pins on the other side, so the middle pin goes to the very bottom of the other side. And then there's a red wire, and that red wire comes here. And I put in 2 jumpers here. It doesn't come with jumpers, so you have to solder in 2 jumpers here. So this top one on the three poles that are here, the top one goes here. The middle one goes diagonally to the corner. And the bottom one of the 3 down here goes to this pin. Now on the other side, where it's grounded and it comes diagonally to the bottom, that orange one follows and goes right here. And then the yellow one that's on the top goes right there. Let's see if we can focus this a little bit better. There. Okay, so that way you can see where these wires go. And what are these 2 wires that are here? So those 2 wires go to the piezo buzzer that makes the clicking noises when the drive, the fake drive, the electronic drive is supposedly going. So and that just makes a little clicking sound, so you know that the drive is working. Okay, so that is the deal. And then my cable here provides 5 volts to this pin, and I usually skip a pin, and then the negative goes to the other, and then the transmit and receive wires aren't used. Okay, so that's the way this board is wired. Okay, so now how am I? Let me also show you that OLED display. So you can see if I put a USB stick in there, you can see the OLED display update. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, remember, I wanted to hook this Gotek up to the external 37-pin port on the back of the PC. So I built this cable. I'll leave you the link. I ordered this cable already built. Okay, it's 37 pins, and it's the 37 ribbon cable. Okay, so that was ordered as is. And then I also ordered this IDE connector here. So what I did is, this came with a 37 pin connector on the other side. I popped the tabs and took that out. And then, since you're only using 34 pins, looking at it from this side, just like that, you don't use the leftmost 3 wires out of this. And I also, you don't need to do this, but if you don't twist these wires, basically you have to set your switch on the Gotek to S0. So I have it set to S1, because I put a twist in here. So you're twisting 10 through 16, counting this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 10 through 16 get twisted, okay? And so this, I'm only going to be hooking up the Gotek to it, but what you can do is you can put another one of these IDE plugs in the middle somewhere, and then you can have, you can hook up 2 drives, a 720 and a 360 if you like. So that's the deal with this cable, and I'll leave you the wiring diagram for it, but you can see how it's wired. You can see, there you go. Using this, you can see where pin 1 is. You can see where pin 1 is here. Okay? So this is going to hook up to the 37 pin on the back of the PC. And this will hook up to the Gotek. The red, which is usually the number 1, on this side goes to the power supply. Okay? So this is going to hook up like this. Okay, just like that. With the number 1 pin towards the power. All right. So let's go and plug this into the XT, and let's keep our fingers crossed and see if we can pull this up as a floppy.